dietitian for Shar USA, which is a gluten-free food manufacturer, and I welcome you to Gluten-Free Diet 101. How many of you are new to the diet? Perfect. This is the place for you to be. Those of you who have been doing this for a while, I'm going to ask you to bear with us, but I'm going to promise you that we'll learn something new too. How's that sound? So what we're going to do today is we'll go to the next slide, and we're going to review the diet quick. We're going to look at the changing market because I think that has a big impact on the perception of the diet. We're going to look at labeling, and then we're going to go away with some practical points because what's really important, it's one thing to know the nuts and bolts of the diet, but we need to live it, breathe it, and make it work in our daily life. Okay, so when we look at the gluten-free category today, one thing we need to realize, and I'm sure you've all seen, the category has grown astronomically. It has gone from being nowhere in 2005 to over 14 million items and a $14 billion industry. But what's really important from all this growth and from all the increased awareness is that there's a whole host of different companies that are coming into the gluten-free marketplace. Okay, we can go to the next one. We can look at the number of sales has actually increased from 2011 to 2013 to a total of a $13.6 billion category. That's huge, and you need to remind your grocery stores that you are part of that category and they need to listen to you when you ask for certain things. We also need to look at not just the total category, because the total category of gluten-free items includes things like gluten-free water, gluten-free tea, gluten-free broccoli. What's a real powering point is to tell your supermarket that the core category, those foods that need to be gluten-free, your bread, your pasta, your crackers, has grown over 29%, which is more than the whole category altogether. And the real compelling point you need to hammer home with him is that this part of the market is growing close to 30%. The GDP for the first quarter grew 0.1%. So he needs to listen to you because you are keeping him in business. Okay, so that's an important thing for us to take away. So we know the category is big. We know there's a lot of new companies coming in, and we know that you're empowering those stores to stay in the marketplace. So they need to listen to you. We also need to look at the diet. Now, for those people that were relatively newly diagnosed, how many remember French fries and hamburger buns that you could go in and pick up and a Danish or a muffin? I know, they're savory, they're wonderful, but that wheat-based diet is not what you need, but it also did provide a certain amount of nutrition that you now are lacking on a gluten-free diet. And we need to make sure that we replace those specific nutrients, in particular iron, calcium, your B vitamins, and very importantly, fiber. You don't get those in a gluten-free diet. A wheat-based diet by FDA law is required to enrich all wheat-based products so that even if those nutrients are processed out, they must be added back in. That law does not cover gluten-free or other dietary products. So your harmfully, wonderfully nutrient-filled wheat-based diet now transitions to a gluten-free diet that's not so healthy. Okay, we can go to the next one. So when we look at the basics of the diet, your bread, pasta, crackers, muffins, those are the foods that need to be replaced. However, that's all that needs to be replaced. All your meats, your proteins, your vegetable foods, all of those things are all still naturally gluten-free, and we encourage you to use those. Okay, so I want you to think back to your refrigerator at home. I want you to go home and open the doors and say, I can survive. Because a lot of the food in your cupboard, in your refrigerator, is naturally gluten-free, and we need to make sure that you emphasize those in your diet. That should now be the core of your diet. Okay? There's a lot of talk about going green and being ecological. Well, I'm going to tell you to go beyond being green. I want you to be red and blue and yellow and really include the more colors. The darker the colors in your diet, the more nutrients you have. So you know that beautiful purple eggplant? Start eating it. Red bell peppers, carrots, beets, legumes. The darker the better. The more color, the more nutrients. Okay? Protein sources. Again, we need to think outside the box. We don't need to just think McDonald's beef burger. Okay? We need to really think fish, poultry, beans, garbanzos, nuts, seeds, and use them in different combinations. This also will make your diet less expensive. Let's rethink those protein sources and really use a variety of proteins. Okay. The breads and starches, remember, this is a group that's going to change, and we need to really think very carefully about the choices we make here, because if we're not careful on a gluten-free diet, we're all going to look like that potato lady. Because gluten-free products have more fat and sugar added to them to try to make them taste like those wheat-based products. We do want you to use gluten-free breads and starches, but use the ones that are naturally gluten-free. That way you're avoiding all those extra calories and fats. Okay, so other things that you need to know. Okay, on a gluten-free list, there's been a lot of talk back and forth over the years, and we really want to dispel some of these myths. Vinegar is fine. Distilled alcohol is fine. Caramel color, citric acid, these are all perfectly safe for you to use. Okay, mono and diglycerides and artificial colors and sweet and flavors. Now, that doesn't mean that you want to use these per se, but they are gluten-free. Okay, next. Things that you do need to question are soups, seasoning mixes, sauces, because these are processed, and once anything goes into a bag or a box, they add stuff to it, and that's what we need to be very careful with. You even need to watch packaged potatoes and rice, because often they will add wheat flour to thicken that. Okay, so that's the basics. We good so far? Okay, now we're going to look at hidden sources. Okay, that slide's actually in the wrong place, but that's okay. So we'll go right through this. Places you also need to be very careful about are where gluten can be hidden. And here we need to really think about all the places we don't normally expect gluten to be hidden. Lipstick, Play-Doh, paper mache, your over-the-counter medications and prescription medications, all potentially could have gluten in them. But also when you're eating out, think about what that chef is doing. If he's making pizzas, he's got flour all over him. So his apron, his gloves, all of that can be gluten-laden and potentially get you cross-contaminated. Lotions and sunscreens is another area I'm going to have to talk about. How many of you have younger children, okay, that need to be gluten-free? All right. For adults, lotions and topical things that you put on your body are not a concern. However, if you've got kids, they drink the bathwater, they lick their skin, they nibble on their toes, which means anything you put on their body goes in their mouth, and it needs to be gluten-free. So for adults, you're not going to eat your soap or drink your shampoo. It's okay. But for kids, we really need to make sure that all of those things also stay gluten-free. And there's a lot of manufacturers that make those gluten-free products for them. Okay. Now, this next part is, those are the basics. We know the diet, but here are the concerns. There's been several studies, and we're going to look at 3 very carefully to really highlight nutritional concerns about a gluten-free diet. Now, you need to do it. It's your prescription for health, but there's big concerns. The study that we did with Tricia Thompson, we looked at about 50 of our patients and evaluated their diet, and what we found is that none of them met the RDAs for core nutrients. They didn't meet it for iron, for calcium, or the B vitamins. The only group that met the RDA was men for calcium. That was it. No one else met any of their RDAs. This was also the study where we found the most common side dish used, that kind of bread and starch group, was white rice, followed by gluten-free donuts. Now, I'm going to ask you, how many of you have had gluten-free donuts? Okay, you could play hockey with most of them. So why they come up, I think, is a very important point. We always look for those comfort foods, even if they're not good. It's those box of gluten-free cookies that you open one and you eat one, or you open the box, you eat one, and you go, okay, it's not an Oreo, let me try another one, maybe that will be better. And you finish the box before you know it, and they still don't taste like an Oreo. So we need to really, when we're making nutritional decisions and choices, we need to remember being gluten-free is being gluten-free, and it's your health. So let's make good choices, even on gluten-free donuts. They're not that good. Okay. The next study was one done by Howard, and I have to be very honest. In the field of gluten-free research, we'll do research here in the U.S., and because we're relatively new to this, the Europeans think they've got this down pat and know this forever, they will say, oh, how could you possibly come up with those results? So Hallert out of Sweden said, our people eat better than that, and there's no nutritional concerns with my patients on celiac disease. And so he looked at 30 of his patients, and guess what? Same problems. He measured all of his patients when they started the diet, and about 8 to 12 years later, guess what? They all gained about 20 pounds and had signs of malnutrition. They also ate the same number of servings of breads as their non-gluten-free or wheat-eating people. And we found that even though the numbers of servings of breads and starches were the same between those that had a gluten-free diet and those that ate a wheat-based diet, the gluten-free people had marked nutritional deficiencies. So we know that the gluten-free products are the problem in the weight gain and also in the nutritional deficiency. Okay. So what do we know? We know a standard gluten-free diet is your ticket to health, but it's based on grains that aren't that healthy. And we know that some rice is fortified, but white rice isn't going to really make it. You need to look for the brown rice. The gluten-free diet is lacking in key vitamins and minerals. What the good answer is that there's a lot of good alternative or ancient grains that do provide those nutrients you need. Okay. If we compare the grains, if we look at things like gluten-free oats, quinoa, amaranth, they provide all those key nutrients that are missing in a gluten-free diet. So we did another study. We took that standard gluten-free diet, that white rice and donut-based diet, and we changed just the grain portion of that diet. And we found that, if you go to the next slide, we found that changing just those plain grains increased the nutrient content of the diet twofold. So we now met all the RDAs for that. What I would recommend is using some of these ancient grains like amaranth, quinoa, buckwheat. These are the grains that will provide those nutrients that we need. Here's the slide. I thought it was the other way around. And you can see the maroon bar is the one that shows the increase in nutrients just by changing those 3 grains. And all we did was add oatmeal, quinoa, and brown rice. Not much, but a complete change in nutritional profile. Yes?
Just a quick question. The oatmeal that normally gets sold across the counter, isn't it contaminated?
It is highly contaminated, which is why we said gluten-free oats. Absolutely. Absolutely. You can't buy Quaker or any of those just off the counter. We would, in fact, encourage you to be very careful in selecting your gluten-free oats, that it's a certified and done in a clean facility. Okay. So, what are our recommendations? For cereals, there's great dry amaranth cereals. There's great gluten-free certified oats, your gluten-certified buckwheat, and quinoa. Side dishes, quinoa and millet work really great. Pasta, there's a great variety of pastas. Don't stick with the standard corn and rice pasta. There's great bean pasta, there's quinoa pasta. There's a lot of pastas that will meet your nutritional needs and your flavor needs much, much better. Breads, choose your breads wisely. We do not want to look like that potato lady. We really want a bread that's going to give you not just something to put your sandwich on, but the good nutrition you need too. Okay, so I'm telling you, the gluten-free diet is your ticket to health. There are some concerns. The answers are in the grains, but just like the gentleman asked the question about the gluten-free oats, we found the same trouble with gluten-free grains. If we go to the next slide, we did a study of 22 samples of those ancient grains. A third of them a third of them, 32%, had evidence of cross-contamination, which is just like the oats the gentleman brought up. If we go to the next slide, you can see that as you look across the different types of flour, soy flour had almost 3,000 parts per million gluten in it. So there's a risk of high contamination even in these ancient grains. Millet had 305. To be gluten-free, it has to be under 20 parts per million. So we can go to the next slide, while we look at these grains as being a nutritional answer, we have to be very, very careful. And just like the oats, we need to look for these ancient grains that are certified gluten-free and are labeled gluten-free. Okay? So that brings us to reading the label. I don't know if you can see this, but on the little pink ticket next to those apples, it says, "Please help yourself to our delicious bananas." This was a bowl of apples that was in a hotel that I was recently staying at, and I thought, isn't that interesting? I don't know about you, but those are not bananas. But that label is really much like our current labeling law for gluten-free. It's very deceptive. It says it's bananas, but it's really apples. We need to be very careful. We need to make sure you check that the product is certified gluten-free, that someone's testing it, that it's done in a clean manufacturer, because, if we go to the next slide, the new FDA law just says the product to be labeled gluten-free needs to be under 20 parts per million. That part sounds great, okay? Now we're looking at apples. The next part of the law says it is up to the manufacturer to do the testing, and it's up to the manufacturer to check it. That's the part that makes the apples look like bananas, because you can't trust everyone. And I'm going to say that from my heart as a celiac myself. We need to make sure that you're really checking the products that you're getting are indeed gluten-free. Okay, if we go to the next slide, we also need to be very aware that the FDA law does not cover your prescription medications. Okay, so you need to absolutely make sure that you check and call batch by batch, because they can change the ingredients on any of these medications. We also need to be very careful with products that are covered by the USDA. So that is your canned beans, your chicken nuggets, anything that has egg, meat, poultry in it, because they're not covered by FDA. So if a packaged chicken nugget says gluten-free, all bets are off, because it's not under this new law. So we need to make sure that you really do check each of these things. The next slide also says the advisory statements. I know this sounds horrible. We were doing very positive, and now we're going downhill. But it's important to know, because the advisory statements that say may contain or processed in a plant are indeed voluntary. They are not required to be on packaging. So you could have a product labeled gluten-free that's manufactured next to wheat-based products, and it does not have to be on the label. So you really have to make sure you call and check, or make sure that the product is certified gluten-free. That's the way to know for sure that that product is going to be safe. Okay, now what? I want everyone to take a breath. It gets better. It really, really does. Let's go. Okay, dining out should be fun. It should not feel like, the next slide, this. And I'm going to tell you that how many of you, when you dine out, you feel this exhausted by the time you are done talking to the waiter, talking to the staff, asking for the chef, and then you get your meal, and it might as well be cat food, because it is just that depressing. So, what can we do? Here are options, because in the world of gluten-free, the diet is generally a good, healthy diet if we make the right choices. Labeling is sketchy. We know that, but we can be armed with defenses and take care of this. We need to think of dining out differently. When you think of dining out, why do we go out to eat? It's to be social. It's to be with friends. It's a night off. We can create those feelings in other ways without the risk. Many grocery stores now have dine-in options. You can go in, there's cafes, there's rotisserie chicken, there's all kinds of things. Pick your stores that have those options and the stores that get gluten-free. Because if they're selling gluten-free in the store, they have some concept of what it needs to be. And you can follow in and look for things that prepared meals that the chef can go back and check if it's gluten-free. The meat manager can go and read a label for you. So think of dining out differently. Take your date, take your spouse, take your kids, and go to the grocery store. It's probably a safer place to do. The important thing about the dining out is that emotional feeling. Let's create it someplace else, okay? The other thing is, if you want to do a date night and go to a restaurant, look for a place that has a gluten-free menu. Again, if they have a gluten-free menu, there's a little bit more assurance that they know what's going on and they have a good idea. Look for people that have the gluten-free restaurant awareness program so that they will also certify it. Talk to the chef. Don't be bashful. We need to speak up and be heard. Explain your dietary needs, okay? But do it this way. You need to be gentle but firm. Do you remember the movie When Harry Met Sally? Okay, remember when they're in the diner? Not the second time, the first time, okay? In the first diner scene, okay, Harry goes in and says, I'll have a number 3. He's done. Sally says, well, I'll have the chicken Caesar salad, but I don't want tomatoes. I want salad dressing on the side, and I want apple pie. But I want apple pie warmed with peach ice cream if you have it. If you don't have peach ice cream, I want my apple pie cold with vanilla ice cream on the side. But she goes through this litany of da-da-da-da-da, all the things she wants. And, of course, the waitress rolls her eyes. But she serves her. Now, I know this is Hollywood. But in reality, why can't we be that firm? The first time we were diagnosed, I was working gluten-free for years and years. My son stopped growing. Finally took him to the doctor, convinced the pediatrician to test him. It was my daughter's birthday, who's not gluten-free. So we went out, and we were trying to maneuver. I said, okay, we can do this. I can do this. We can order gluten-free, and we can have a birthday celebration. So I go, thinking Sally, to the waiter. Chicken Caesar salad, dressing on the side, no croutons, no crackers. Okay, my son looks at me and goes, Mom, they're not going to get it right. He looks at the waiter and says, I'll have a steak, naked, no marinade, no sauce, nothing. I want a baked potato, in foil, don't touch it, don't cut it, and that's all. And the waiter's kind of taken back a little bit, and I'm like mortified. And he goes then to the waiter, and if it doesn't get done this way, I will die, and she will sue you. I was ready to crawl under the table. However, the important part of the story is not that. His meal came out carried by the chef. My salad came out with breadsticks, with croutons, totally a mess. So while we don't have to be that dramatic, and maybe Sally won't get it quite right, we need to do something in the middle. We need to make sure they understand it will make a difference. We're not Miley Cyrus. We will get sick, okay? They need to understand there's a difference between fad and medical necessity. The only way to do that is to be firm and tell them, I will get sick. Explain to them an ambulance in front of the restaurant is not good PR. They will understand that. Now, they may not need to know that you're not going to get that sick, but it helps them to understand how important it is. Okay? No one wants to go to a restaurant where they're taking people out by ambulance. So, things that we need to do is, besides going out and eating and making sure that you're firm and strong for yourself, we also need to travel. And I would tell you to go, but leave the country, okay? Because it's easier to go and travel gluten-free outside of the U.S. Canada, they get it. Europe, they get it. And there's a lot of great resources that can help you do gluten-free internationally. The keys are to be confident and be strong. How much time? Okay. And to make sure that you're well prepared. There are gluten-free support groups internationally. You can go on their websites, and they have English translations. They have cards that explain gluten-free in any language you possibly want. There are apps for your phone, Find Me Gluten-Free, that work internationally. There's websites like Gluten-Free Roads that absolutely have grocery stores, coffee shops. You go to Europe and along the highway, you know the gas stations that we pull into and it's the 7-Eleven? There you can get a gluten-free sandwich. So there's options. There's lots of options, okay. Also, do your homework. So make sure that you travel with all this good information with you. Do a lot of it ahead. Contact the international support groups before you go. I had one patient one time who was going back to Dublin. It's his first trip back to Ireland after being diagnosed gluten-free. I said, now come on, you've got to be good. You're feeling better. You really have to stick with it. Because I'm going home. It's beer, fish, and chips. I'm like, not to worry. I will figure this out for you. I emailed the Irish Celiac Society and got 4 pages of pubs in Dublin that do gluten-free beer, fish, and chips. He had no excuse. So doing your homework ahead arms you. It lets you be strong. But also be prepared. Get your physician to write on his prescription pad, not a note paper, not anything else, that has his license number on it and address. And on it he needs to write, you need a gluten-free diet. It is a medical necessity, and you must be allowed to travel with food. That gets you through TSA. Now, not a gallon of stuff, but at least you'll be able to get through your peanut butter, your yogurt, things that you'll need en route. Travel with foods and snacks so that you are prepared on the plane. Most international flights do serve meals, and coming from Europe back, you'll get a gluten-free meal that's to die for. Going from here to Europe, it can be a little bit sketchier, again, because you're leaving this country. So you need to travel with things that travel well. Tuna in a foil pack, peanut butter in the little travel size cups, nuts, all kinds of things. They now have hummus in travel size. Take things with you, take a cooler. Look TSA in the eye and say, I need this. Okay? Other solutions are, there's a bunch of websites, and we'll post it on the Living Without website, so you'll have all these. Okay? And our reference.